Bonjour et bienvenue à cette conférence du CIRST. Aujourd'hui, on a le plaisir de recevoir Osvaldo Gallardo, qui est professeur à l'Université nationale de Cuyo et chercheur au Conseil national de la recherche scientifique et technique en Argentine. Ses recherches concernent principalement la sociologie des sciences et plus particulièrement les tendances mondiales dans la circulation des connaissances. Et ce qui concerne aussi les questions d'inéquité qui y ont cours, c'est entre autres de ça dont il sera question aujourd'hui. Au CIRST, il est ici, il séjourne actuellement au CIRST dans le cadre d'un projet qui est entre autres financé par l'Agence universitaire de la Francophonie, un projet qui inclut des scientifiques du Québec, du Brésil et de l'Argentine. Osvaldo Gallardo is a professor at National University of Cuyo and a researcher at CONICET in Argentina. His research focuses on the sociology of science, global trends in the circulation of knowledge, with a focus on gender and idiomatic disparities. At CIRST, he is participating in a project funded partially by the Agence universitaire de la Francophonie, which includes scientists from Quebec, Brazil, and Argentina. The presentation that he will do for us today is the title is Scientific Publishing from Peripheral Countries, Bibliometric Databases Coverage and the Impact of Article Processing Charges in a Challenging Context. Pour les personnes qui se joignent à nous en ligne aujourd'hui, bonjour. Pour les personnes qui se joignent à nous en ligne aujourd'hui, on demande évidemment de conserver autant que possible le micro fermé pendant le temps de la conférence. Évidemment, après la tenue de la présentation, on va encourager les questions à la fois en salle et en ligne. Il suffira évidemment d'utiliser la fonction là, pour les personnes qui sont en ligne, lever la main dans le logiciel Zoom. So, as I just said, we ask everyone online to keep their microphones turned off for the duration of the talk. We encourage questions from the floor and online. When the time comes, simply use the raise your hand function in Zoom. So with no further ado, as they say, I leave you the floor.
Thank you very much. I want to start my presentation by thanking the CIRST and Université de Montréal, Dr. Yves Gingras, Dr. Vincent Larivière, and for the support for his stay in Montreal, and the staff members of the CIRST and the colleagues here okay. It was planned originally as a visit of 5 researchers and doctoral students from universities of Cuyo and San Juan in Argentina, but we faced some bureaucratic problems since last year. But for now, it's on me, but maybe next year, or probably next year, you will have the visit of 2 doctoral students from Mendoza and San Juan. Most of my presentation correspond to a collective effort made by the Research Center on the Circulation of Knowledge, the CSIC for its acronym in Spanish. It's a group based in Mendoza and San Juan in Argentina and led by Fernanda Beigel, who visited the CIRST last year, I think. And I've prepared a presentation divided in 3 main parts. First, I'm going to present bibliodiversity and multilingualism as central characteristics of scientific publication and scientific output in 2 peripheral countries, Brazil and Argentina. Then, in the second part, a more methodological reflection on how we are analyzing this diverse scientific output. And in the third part, the most recent results from research, an international research project with focus on the APC, the article processing charges, and their impact in 4 countries, also peripheral: Brazil, Argentina, South Africa, and Mexico. Oh. For the first part, why bibliodiversity and multilingualism? It's largely known the permanent biases that the international or traditional or mainstream databases have in terms of their linguistic coverage, their country coverage, and how a certain style of science, or a certain style of circulation of sciences is overrepresented, and other styles of circulation and publication are clearly represented. We analyze this matter and we're trying to propose alternatives to that scenario, focusing in 2 countries. Argentina and Brazil are peripheral countries, of course, but they could be considered as peripheral centers in the panorama of the world academic system. They are far from North or Central countries, however, they show a long and strong tradition in all scientific fields, and they have historically specific forms of academic autonomy. For example, for the case of Chile and Argentina, Fernanda Beigel and other colleagues have shown how the engagement in politics during 60s and 70s was a condition more than an obstacle for the emergence of autonomous scientific fields. When traditionally, or from a Bourdieu perspective, politics and autonomy, they don't work together well, or they are opposite in the construction of the legitimacy of the field. And we specifically analyzed 2 research communities within these 2 countries, not the complete scientific production from these countries. In the case of Argentina, we took the group of tenured researchers, full-time researchers at CONICET, the National Council for Research and for Scientific and Technical Research. CONICET is an institution similar to CNRE in France. And in Brazil, we have the productivity grant holders, it's a weird name, so bolsistas de produtividade, Portuguese. They are scholars from different, mostly from universities in Brazil, that apply for a categorization and a specific grant to this institution, the National Council for Scientific and Technical Development, the CNPq or CNPq. And we choose these 2 populations of researchers, not only because it is easier to access information about them, but because they represent the more internationalized parts or of sectors of each national academic field. These institutions have an evaluative culture strongly crossed by the Web of Science, Scopus, or mainstream indexing, and the consideration of impact factor or similar metrics in order to perform the assessment and the, in the categorization or ranking the researchers. It's relevant to analyze the diversity of publications and forms of circulation of these two populations, because they are the more internationalized elites in the country. Outside these institutions, in national universities, in other kind of scientific institutions, or institutions with eventual participation in academic activities, we will find an even more diverse circuits of circulation and modalities of publication and circulation of knowledge. For example, for CONICET researchers, we are analyzing here the accumulated indicators of publication in formal or articles. The first column, the second one correspond to chapters or parts of books, and the third one to books. This is for the year, the accumulated indicators for the year 2020. We found in the first column, as could be expected, mostly publication in journals published outside Argentina and outside other Latin American countries, but it is expected. But in the case of chapters and in the case of books, most of those kind of publications are made in regional and national by regional or national editorials or universities, or we have a vast and diverse environment of publication of books. And of course, I will mention this later, but as you may suppose, those chapters, those books, and a part of the articles published in Argentina and Latin America, and even in other countries, are not covered by, and maybe never will cover it by, any database. If we think in web science, it is pretty clear, but in more comprehensive databases, probably we will never find books and chapters of this kind of researchers. For social sciences researchers and professors, of course, books and parts of books are more relevant than in other areas, but we found a third part of researchers from fields different from social sciences have published a book, at least one, during their trajectories, and 60 to 73% have published at least a chapter. In all cases, all those books, or a majority of those books, are mainly dated in Latin American countries. I don't have the equivalent chart for the Brazilian case, but the weight of editorials and journals in Brazil is even greater than for Brazilians than the Argentinian circuit for Argentinian researchers. And my colleague Maximiliano Salatino have shown how 50% of journals in Latin America, and especially in Brazil, are not indexed, even in the most, neither in the most comprehensive or larger indexing services in Latin America as Latindex or others. So there is a lot of production or scientific output with no coverage. I'd like to propose two ways to maybe approach to this diverse world of publications. In terms of, before going for that, in terms of language, we compare. Now we are focusing on the articles published in this period. We found in non-social sciences, in biological, natural and exact, and agriculture sciences and engineering researchers, most of their publications are made in English. This is quite different from social sciences, of course, but the proportion in corresponding to other to national languages, Spanish for Argentina and Portuguese for Brazil, is far from being respectable. So we have 20% of articles from agriculture and engineering researchers and technological researchers in Brazil. They are publishing a fifth part of their articles in Portuguese. It's quite a number, because the productivity of this group of researchers is really greater compared to Argentina and compared to other countries too. For social sciences, of course, the weight of Spanish and Portuguese is higher, and we are analyzing here we are comparing here our complete data set and the portion which is indexed by science. But even in the web science indexed articles, we have 27% of articles published in Spanish in this case. And this is relevant because Argentina doesn't have many journals indexed by web science. It's different in Brazil, in Chile, in Colombia, countries with a more directly oriented to indexation or indexing their journals in that circuit. But in Argentina, we don't find, I don't remember the number, but it's really small, the number of Argentinian journals indexing in web science. But we have a fourth part published in Spanish in web science indexed journals. Just some data to illustrate this diversity of publications and this characteristic of diversity and multilingualism in the scientific output from these two countries. But I'd like to emphasize how we can analyze, how we can build databases with a wider coverage than which is offered by the traditional databases. Short answer is, I have two short answers. On the one side, we need to build sui generis new databases following the model of CIRST, the current research information systems, but in approach bottom up, looking what is trying to cover the publication from researchers using national curricular databases, if they are available, and complementing it with the second step, complementing that information with the bibliometric sources, especially OpenAlex. And OpenAlex is quite relevant for Argentina in this moment, because maybe we can discuss this later, but from last year, from December, we don't have access to Scopus anymore in Argentina, because the cut in scientific budget, they raised the Ministry of Science, the new administration. I'm sure maybe you have, I'm sure you have watched some news from Argentina in the last few months. OpenAlex is the more dimensions is other interesting alternative, but OpenAlex is today the only wider and accessible database, and probably all bibliometric studies in Argentina are focusing on using OpenAlex. But we are trying with Fernanda and other colleagues to make a methodological shift from starting from a Bourdieuian analysis of these two concrete scientific fields, with building the field with the individuals we can put inside or within that field, and collecting information about their positions in that field. As you know, collecting that kind of information is really hard. The name at the first step, the sex or the gender, the historical evolution of their positions or institutional positions, where they are working, in what university, in what institute, where internationalization, mobilities, etc. It's really hard to collect that kind of information. But our intention is for these two groups of researchers, once again, the CONICET from Argentina and the CMPQ for Brazil, build that universe of researchers and obtain a bibliometric indicators about the circulation of their publications, using a comprehensive list of publications of these researchers, which are available at these national curricular databases, the platform LATES in the case of Brazil, and the CIGEVA in the case of CONICET or Argentina. This is a synthesis of our methodological approach. We collect this type of variables from this group of 24,000 researchers, 10,000 in Argentina, 14,000 in Brazil. We have access to national curricular information. This is not an automatized process. We have to ask for this information. It's not under an open access environment, and we analyze that information both for positions and for bibliometric indicators and information, and curated it, of course, and then enriching that list of articles and other kind of publications with bibliometric sources. In one of the two finished studies we have complete, we analyzed the coverage of Web of Science and Scopus and the article citation in Web of Science, Scopus, and Google Scholar. The use of Google Scholar was intended and performed before the additional layer of obstacles put by Google Scholar to access the information. So it's really hard and really expensive today to obtain complete list of citations or other indicators from Google Scholar. And combining these two sources of information, we have complete two studies. One focusing on gender asymmetries, and another one in database coverage. Okay, the structure in terms of sex or gender in Argentina is quite similar to other countries. We have here the initial stage of CONICET researchers, the label assistant. We have here a majority of female research, but in the top of the hierarchy, these categories or these tiers, we have a majority of men, as usual in many analyses of gender asymmetries. In the case of Brazil, we have a majority of men in all tiers. But what we were able to analyze is based on that opposition between male and female researchers, and segmented it by numerous variables. In this case, the evaluative committee where they are enrolled. We have men, the lighter columns, having a more a higher average number of articles than the darker column, which corresponds to female researchers. In almost every case, in the case of Brazil, in the case of Argentina, in the four major fields we can classify the researchers. And starting from this general panorama, we can refine the focus of the analysis and analyzing, for example, how men and women who started their career in the last decade and taking groups of the same age, both biological and academic, even in the first steps of their careers. Male researchers have higher indicators of publications, citation, number of publications, citations, etc., than women in the very same conditions of their careers. So, in the case of the second study, we recently published as a preprint this last week. We found that our complete database of 81,000 articles from Argentina CONICET researchers in this period, only 61% is covered by Web of Science, and only 63% of Scopus is covered by Scopus. And of course, the coverage of Web of Science and Scopus is overlapping. And the panorama for Brazil is quite similar, with a majority or with a very significant part of those articles not being covered by Web of Science or Scopus. And of course, here we can see the differences I shown a few slides before, when the articles published in Portuguese usually correspond to, or largely correspond to, articles published in Brazilian journals, and most of them in not having this kind of indexing. So this is the portion of the non-indexing articles. The regional databases, Cielo and Redalic, are partially overlapped with the Scopus and Web of Science circles, but they don't cover the majority of the non-mainstream indexed articles, because they are regional databases, only include Latin America and a few more countries. Journals, and we are analyzing here the more internationalized parts of the scientific fields. And to add, what's next? And taking OpenAlex, the coverage of OpenAlex is, of course, greater than Scopus and Web of Science, but I'd like to show briefly this table. This is not completed yet. We are going deep in this kind of analysis, but if we analyze we know OpenAlex is wider than Web of Science. Lucia Céspedes and other colleagues recently published a preprint showing the diversity of OpenAlex in terms of their linguistic coverage, and probably underestimation of non-English of the languages different from English. So, but how is it possible to use in a specific context, in concrete countries or scenarios? Is a valid source OpenAlex, or by the contrary, is it showing a very similar panorama of Scopus? And we took a group of 9 universities in Argentina, and we analyzed the articles associated with these universities through the affiliation institution field. The interesting point is for University of Buenos Aires, the major university in Argentina, we have, for this period, if we go before, it's different, but for the last years, OpenAlex has 56% more articles than Scopus. For that period, Córdoba, another major university, Cuyo, my university, they have similar rates. But the interesting is the difference we found when we go for smaller and more peripheral universities in Argentina. Even Misiones is located in the extreme north, Patagonia Austral in the extreme south of the country. And for those kind of universities, not so internationalized, not so internationally oriented, the difference of the coverage of OpenAlex respect from Scopus is quite larger. And probably OpenAlex is offering a different, a qualitative different, not only quantitative different information from Scopus or from Web Science. And of course, this difference is different corresponds to articles in Spanish, articles in Argentina, articles in Latin American countries. Okay, and for the third part, and adding an additional layer of problems or difficult to those peripheral countries, we have the rising problem of the article processing charges or APCs costs that journals impose to authors as part of the transition to open access, the transition to a commercial open access. We have numerous bibliometric estimation on the APCs or maximum APCs total amounts. So we analyze in which journals researchers are publishing, and we browse different databases, DOAJ or other, and we analyze or we estimate maximum amounts, and the actual cost is hidden behind the business of the big enterprises or editorial monopolies. But there is a lack of studies on the author's perspective, on their practices, on their representations about this problem, particularly relevant for peripheral countries, since the inflation in the APC costs affects more to researchers with no access to larger or international funding lines. For just to mention the craziness, today an APC of $2,000 for Argentinian researchers is directly out of discussion. There is no way, or it's almost impossible to afford that kind of cost. So this project is coordinated by Fernanda Weigel and Ria Sarvanitis, and is based on the Global Research Institute of Paris and the Université de Paris. And in the first stage, we have analyzed 4 countries or 4 institutions within 4 countries: the National Research Foundation from South Africa, the Sistema Nacional de Investigadores from Mexico, and the CMPQ and the CONICET from Brazil and Argentina. They have in common, once again, representing the more internationalized part of the scientific system. They have categorization tiers. And for Brazil, the response rate was particularly high. 41% of researchers responded our online questionnaire. For Argentina, it's quite high too. We deployed different strategies for each country, so the rates are lower for Mexico and South Africa, but they are balanced in terms of the main characteristics of the researchers. I'm going to go directly to the results. Why our perspective is different from previous studies? We asked to these researchers, have you published in at least once in a journal with APCs in the last 5 years? And later we asked them, how do you pay? Do you pay? Did you pay, or you have another strategy? But the focus of this question is different because we are asking for the publishing in the APC journals, which allows us to compare an horizontal opposition or distribution with South Africa, with 77 of researchers having published in that kind of journals, and in the extreme, the opposite, the Argentina were only less than half have published in that kind of journals. And of course, we have vertical distribution when we have this group of disciplines where the publishing in the commercial open access is much more relevant than in social sciences, of course. But and we have engineering and basic sciences in an intermediate position. But we can see easily the heterogeneity between these four countries, relevant countries, at least in the peripheral world. Because even for social sciences, 68% of South African researchers of the NRF have published in that circuit. This is showing us the existence of different considerable funding lines specifically oriented to afford APCs. An unexpected opposition, once again, because we have a bottom-up approach, is the comparison between male and female researchers in terms of have published in APC journals. I'm showing here only Argentina and South Africa to a better representation, but the same occurs in the other countries. The proportion of male researchers having published in that kind of journals is higher in almost every case, in almost every discipline, than the proportion of female researchers. So probably we are finding here that the APC dimension must be included as a relevant dimension of gender asymmetries in scientific field. And maybe the most interesting results came from a group of questions about how do you pay those APCs. And again, we have a difference between countries. Using own research project funds is quite important for South Africa. It represents the availability of research which could be used to pay APCs. And the case of Argentina, the more relevant strategy is asking for partial or full waivers, followed by, of course, the use of research funds. This is decreasing in the last few months, probably, but it's relevant also the option in hybrid journals, not choosing the open access publication and not paying the APC cost. For Mexico and Brazil have an intermediate position. Once again, we have 35% of Brazilian researchers mentioning personal funds. We are not sure the meaning of this. Probably the Brazilian colleagues they are going to make a more qualitative approach to find some meaning to this, because it's quite higher. But for South Africa, once again, we have the presence of a specific institutional APC oriented specific funds, completely opposed to the Argentinian situation. Of course, we have, previous to the designing of this questionnaire, we have a study of politics on open access in each country, on APC, etc. And South Africa was the only country with a specific funding lines for APCs. So as synthesis, we have a group of researchers, mostly represented or better represented by South African researchers, with the major extension of publishing in APC journals is associated with higher amounts, higher maximum and average amounts paid in terms of APCs. It's quite different, South Africa, from the other three countries. So they have access to more money. They publish in higher APC journals. The APC publication is more frequent among younger researchers, where they probably have an urgency to publish more in order to survive to academic world, and of course the availability of a specific and oriented funding. And the other ideal group represented better for Argentinian researchers, to the less extension of publishing in APC journals appears associated with asking for waivers, with not publishing in open access, in golden open access journals, or circuit in hybrid journals, and the international collaboration as a relevant strategy in order to afford APCs. For Argentina, other relevant, I forgot to mention it, a relevant strategy is the payment made by international co-authors, larger than in any country. It puts on the table a lot of questions in the upcoming years. The patterns of international collaboration will be affected, or are being affected, by the APC problem, especially for countries with the problems like Argentina has now, and the consequences in terms of authorship, positions, etc. Finish. Further questions is probably APC is a new variable to be considered in order to describe the gender asymmetries in scientific publications and career building. The second question is how could be possible to combine the two approaches of APC, this one based on practices and representations and individuals, and the other one based on bibliometric estimation. We have discussing yesterday with colleagues from Universitaire of Montreal yesterday, and linked with the previous question, what is the specific tension about APC in every disciplinary field? The particularities of every space, every field or subfield, and the presence of the change of very dominant question, of very relevant journals in those spaces. For example, if a major journal in a specific field turns from golden open access to full open access, what consequences it could have in terms of practices and organization and collaboration of authors in order to publish in those journals. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup, Osvaldo. Thank you very much for this presentation. As you mentioned at the end of on the last slide, it raises really interesting questions. I'm sure the floor and online they will be able to ask you some question or make some comments about it. So I will try to alternate between question on the floor and online if there are some. So don't hesitate. Je vais essayer d'alterner entre les questions en salle et en ligne s'il y en a. Donc n'hésitez pas à y aller. Peut-être ouvrir premier à la salle si quelqu'un veut se lancer. Oui.
Français, espagnol, anglais.
Maybe English is better.
English, okay.
If you're okay with that. If you
Yeah,
don't,
no,
you can try to translate. We'll find a way.
or two questions for the distribution of open access, open access and Scopus in national universities in Argentina. I was wondering if that can be explained partially by the distribution of fields by those universities, because, but this is a hypothesis, I have no clue, but maybe the smaller, more peripheral universities in Argentina, that they tend to have more publications in social science, which would partially explain that difference, not because it denies it, but as an explaining factor, and something similar for the gender asymmetries for APCs, because we know that women in Argentina or in Latin America in general, they tend to publish more in the local circuits, and those local circuits are mostly diamond access. So maybe that's also an explaining factor of the difference of the average expenditure of APCs. But it's kind of the same question in two dimensions.
Yes.
Answer.
Okay. Yes, the disciplinary diversity of the University of Buenos Aires is quite high. It's dominant in every field in Argentina. It is clear, and it's logic. The greater the university or the larger university, the more fields with relevant specialists, authors, etc. And in smaller universities, you have a less diverse panorama. So yes, partially it could be explained by the weight of social sciences in smaller universities, but the university with a larger portion of scholars within social sciences is probably the University of Buenos Aires. So it's in relative terms it is clear, but in absolute numbers, it's not the same. It's not the same scenario. For this, and of course, smaller universities also have maybe more specific orientation in some fields, but it's impossible to label any university as a social science university in Argentina. It's a smaller or a larger part, but they are not always less than half. We can classify the scholars in that field. In the second question,
Gender asymmetries in APCs, and maybe that also counts because of the distribution over fields or circuits of circulation.
Well, in terms of composition of these fields, they are, especially these two, highly dominated by women. We need to a more focused analysis, perhaps opposing seniors when we have a larger portion of men, and researchers in initial stages. This is the first general panorama. We are designing now a more focused a group of studies, much more with smaller focus. I don't know about the different circuits of indexation of circulation. I have to explore it. Maybe I don't know. But in the previous study, the coverage study, and in the gender asymmetry study, the proportion of articles of men indexed in Web Science is larger than women. In some cases, difference around 10%.
Just a brief compliment on this. I would just say that before launching a big interpretation, I would look more in the detail of the data, because if you look at South Africa, the conclusion from that table is that there's no difference. There's no difference. You see, if 85 more than 82, it's fluctuation. So there's no explanation there. There's no difference statistically. On the other one, again, we could look at the detail, because maybe the number are smaller, because you have 24, yes, 21, 43, 39. I would not launch a big scandal with this before looking at the details. And in general, with all your data, there is a place for, and you have just said it, and I'm glad that you mentioned it, we need to do a regression of this, because of the demography of it, it's obvious that the full professor, older one, there are much more men in that. That's totally obvious. And now, as you shown, when you look at the assistant, now the inequality is much lower, because the demography of access has been changed. So we will need a regression analysis of all the variables to be sure, and then see if we need a theory to explain the difference.
But yes, you're right. But if we analyze Brazil and Mexico, they are similar to Argentina. So there's something to explore.
Exactly.
And I think it's related with the you mentioned about South Africa. When we have more access to funding, the difference based on gender is reduced, of course.
Yes, so it means that the variable is the funding. The other thing we have not mentioned is that in the case of South Africa, it's English-speaking country,
yes,
essentially. So the fact that in the first table you showed, of course, they are all in the big, they publish in English. Okay, so there's no reason. So the language is also a variable there. In the first table you showed was a big difference.
Yes.
Of course, South Africa has a longer tradition. It's English-speaking. It's linked to British. No surprise.
And if you go in that line, in South Africa, you should look into the racialized behavior of South Africa. There are some South African universities that are essentially Black universities. Stellenbosch is essentially a white university. Cape Town is mixed. You'd have to look at that as well, it seems to me.
I'm sure it's a relevant dimension. We didn't ask for, didn't include any question on that dimension of analysis in the questionnaire. I'm not an expert in that kind of approximation. Maybe Diego could add something.
The racial differences are huge.
But the intention with this study was to compare and to design a methodological approach to this problem. So, including that kind of question could be really problematic, because in Argentina you can, or even in Mexico, I don't know, maybe in Brazil, you can ask people about racial self.
No, I'm not saying you should do a comparative study
yes,
of those four countries. The question is not raised in the same fashion in South Africa as it might be in Brazil, for example.
Yes.
The two countries have starkly different attitudes to the so-called race issue.
Yeah. But we are expecting to apply this survey in Chile, in Francophone countries in Africa, and maybe in some European world. So it's the first general panorama, which is generating much more questions than answers.
We will have another question from here, but meanwhile, if you're willing to maybe just stop the sharing of your screen, there was a question. Yeah, press that red button. Yeah, and maybe if you go. Yeah, on the top. Yeah, there was a question from André Correa. Maybe we can. It's just a little bit over that, or maybe
André Correa?
Yeah.
And the Brazilian.
So it was about the Brazilian situation. Maybe you can say a word about the predatory publishers that seem to be particularly active in that country in comparison to other. Did you take that into account in your study? That was it.
Could you repeat, please? I was learning.
Yeah, no, it's all right. It was I won't read his whole question, but it was about
predatory
journals. What's the variable in your study?
Well, why we need disciplinary focused studies, because the transition into commercial open access could be drastically change the possibilities of publication in some fields. For example, in the last years, in the last 10 years, maybe, we should analyze where Brazilian or Argentinian researchers are sending their articles. For example, is there a migration from Elsevier journals to MTPI journals, or the journals which were popular 10 years ago have shifted into APC-based model? A majority of them have made that change, and mostly younger scholars are looking for new circuits of recognition. I think the time variable, the historical variable, is quite relevant here, because the change in the scenario of journals and the model followed by those journals is in a rapid change, and we have now the emergence of new variables. Not only the questionable journals, the predatory journals, but the paper mills, the use of artificial intelligence tools, the plagiarism. So, and on the other hand, we have an urgency, mostly for younger researchers, again, to publish. They want to, if we want to survive. So we need to include that kind of variables in the analysis about predatory, about questionable practices in journals.
I think you were.
Yes, just a comment on top of the APCs and generic qualities. I wonder if on top of the age or career stage differences, it would be useful to analyze the gender difference on top of the previous plot, like the one on the strategies on how to pay in APCs, because I wonder if men and women are having different strategies to pay for them, mostly for Argentina, Mexico, and Brazil, because of course the difference compared to South Africa, it's the availability of funding, but I wonder if men are more willing to ask for the APC waiver or not, or like for asking international colleagues for them to pay for it?
That's a good question. I have no answer yet because I need to segment, or we need to segment for disciplinary fields, because if we took the general picture, the conclusions will be obviously biased. But and of course, within these institutions or within these evaluative committees, we have a diversity of trajectories. Not everyone is publishing in commercial open access journals or in English or in Spanish, in non-social and in social sciences respectively. And we need to build homogeneous groups of people in order to answer that kind of question. But I think between not only in the opposition between genders, but in the opposition between career position, we will find interesting differences in asking for a waiver, for example, or on the contrary, using my complete funds research to pay $2,000 APC. Yes, thank you.
Also, I keep thinking of what you said about the lack of studies on authors' perspectives, practices, and representations around the APC problem. I think that's really key because particularly in this under-resourced, perpetually in crisis context of peripheral countries, I think it has to do with the material condition of possibility to publish in open access versus what dispositions or what sympathy you may have like individually towards open access, sharing, etc., etc. And so I was wondering if you guys were going to advance on that, because it that's also very important in order to design further policies to encourage whether we want to go for diamond open access or.
This project is about APC, but about open access and open science also. This I'm analyzing here just the part of the survey, but other parts of the survey had focused on that kind of question. How do you choose a journal to send the contribution? How much do you prefer open access? Do you know what open access is? Do you know what diamond open access is? Have you ever published? Those studies are being published as preprints next month, maybe before end of the year. This is a very large group. I'm working only in APC, but eventually we are going able to combine opinions on the urgency to modify the commercial open access transition with publishing practices, concrete publishing practices, because you can find researchers thinking, oh, I'm against the corporate profits, the insane corporate profits, but I have to publish in MDPI journals, because if not, I'm not going to obtain my tenure position or something. And but yes, there are 4 studies that will be published before the end of the year.
I think Yves wanted to comment on.
Just a compliment on this. Because a key variable that I would like to know, and we'll see in the paper, I guess they take that into account, is because you mentioned in the PowerPoint that maybe the younger, because of career reasons, they would go for APC. I have a serious doubt about this. For some reason that because if they go for a career, it depends on their publication, whatever it is. For example, if they have a paper in Nature, you don't care about APC. It's an average journal, or it's not an APC, it's not an open at all. It's the usual journal, but it's physical review. So if you want to be in physical review, it's free. It's the best strategy for him or her. Okay. It depends, of course, if the policy of the university or the government says you must be in the open science, blah blah blah. Now he's stuck. If it's a policy, he said, I have no money when you tell me to publish open access in Nature, it's $10,000. I don't have it. But they have accepted the paper. Okay. So what I see in terms of strategy, if they want their career, they look at the hierarchy of the journal and they say, okay, I want the tenure, I publish there. I don't give a damn about open access. I publish there. Because those who are in my field will read it anyway. Whatever we think, they will read it. So I think it's not, but again, it will depend on the policy of the government or the university. And not, but in terms of pure strategy, I don't, it's an apprentice. I may be wrong. I'm just saying that in terms of general sociology of science of strategy, the APC is something about policy for open access, gold or diamond and things like that. But the researcher want this paper, for example, in virology or in Journal of Zoology, doesn't care about the rest.
Yes.
Okay, to be sure.
I have the very similar opinion.
Okay.
I know more, I know better the Argentinian case, of course. The last major modification in evaluative criteria in order to attend this kind of issues was the inclusion of the obligation of have published at least one article in a Diamond of Open Access.
Okay.
I don't remember if Fernanda is hearing, she could explain, but I think it was the limit of the modifications in policies in order to this transition to open access, to open science, etc. And on the other hand, the institution CONICET in this case developed rapidly institutional repository with almost everything is open access, independently from the journals policies about restrictions or embargoes period, etc. But I think I think the same. People is urged to publish, and if they can publish in the Lancet, they will. Know.
Yeah, thank you.
So we approach the end of our time, but maybe we can ask a last question, either online or in the room. I don't see any raised hands on the internet, but I have just one in front of me from François. Go ahead.
I'm here, Osvaldo. Question about your second part, especially what you'll do with Open Annex. What I was missing in this part was like, I don't know if I want to call it a baseline, but some sort of baseline. Like you have, Scopus and Web of Science being something like between 50 and 60% of the whole output of your researchers. But then I was wondering, like, what is it like in the rest of the world or something, or just, US or something? So I don't know if you know that, and would that be the benchmark? Say, like, if Open Annex is more inclusive, then the idea is that the proportion of its inclusion will be about the same as kind of US-based researchers. So are you doing that in this project, or that's for
yes, work? But I'm interested mostly in concrete use indicators for universities of institutions in Argentina, which is the field. I'm not participating in the big discussion of OpenAlex. So, but the relevant point for me is most peripheral or non-traditional universities in Argentina, they have no existence in Scopus or Web Science or yes. OpenAlex represents a better a much better source for analyze the not only the publishing but the circulation, which what kind of collaborations, where they are cited from, etc. But for that purpose, we need to analyze the quality of that information. Are those articles that the articles of in OpenAlex are really articles? They are really published in scientific journals with evaluative process, etc. I'm interested in evaluate the quality of data for that kind of use. You know, if to answer, is it usable for Argentina scenario to construct different indicators or not?
Maybe just a brief compliment on OpenAlex. The quality, there are quite a lot of papers now on by the group also. The quality of the data is exceedingly low. Very often, even the address are based on a program that say, okay, this is probably a very grave on UCAM, so let's put that as the address at UCAM, etc. So and essentially, it's better for the source, the paper, the existence of the paper, but there's no citation. The address is problematic. So it's free. So like everything that is free, it can hardly have the quality of something that you pay $200,000, like Scopus or the other one. So it's a good beginning, but now people are coming back to reality. OpenAlex, look at it, OpenAlex. We know what's in there. It's scraping the web, scraping Crossref, scraping, and then put it in there, say, oh, look, it's free. So before it can be used as a bibliometric database, many years. That's my expectation, my prediction even.
A new Google Scholar, are you?
So once again, I would like to thank you very much for your presentation today, Osvaldo. Thank you for being with us. Thank you to the people online for having been with us today and everybody in the room. Merci à tout le monde d'avoir été présent avec nous aujourd'hui. Merci aux personnes qui sont en ligne. Je crois qu'il y avait une discussion aussi qui s'est passée entre certaines personnes en ligne. On n'a pas pu tout rapporter, évidemment. Ça devient un peu laborieux par moment. Mais merci pour tout et à la prochaine. Bonne journée.